The most monstrous acts in history, they weren't committed by some shadowy figure lurking in a dark alley. Nope. They were committed by people who probably smiled at you in the grocery store, maybe they coached your kid's Little League team, or even served on the town council. We're about to dive into a really unsettling truth, that pure evil can be hiding behind the most ordinary, everyday faces.
It's such a simple question, right? But it gets a whole lot more chilling when you start to think about the cases we're about to explore. It really makes you question the deeply uncomfortable reality of the masks that people wear.
All right, so first up, let's talk about the true masters of deception. I mean, these people weren't just criminals, they were architects, building an entire second life. They spent years, sometimes decades, meticulously putting up this facade of respectability, all to hide the absolute horrors they were committing in secret. It's just a terrifying level of manipulation that plays on our most basic instinct to trust people.
I mean, just look at this. The contrast here is it's stark. On one side, you've got John Wayne Gacy, a successful contractor, a guy involved in local politics, and of course, famously, Pogo the Clown, bringing smiles to kids at charity events. But behind that clown makeup, behind that respectable mask, was an absolute waking nightmare. He used that good guy image to lure at least 33 young men and boys to their deaths, often with something as simple as the promise of a job. This timeline really shows you the terrifying patience some of these killers have. For 3 decades, think about that, 30 years, Dennis Rader was a city compliance officer, a husband, a father, a leader in his church. And all that time, he was the BTK killer, bind, torture, kill, who was terrorizing Wichita, Kansas. He murdered 10 people, went completely silent for years, and then, believe it or not, was only caught because his own ego got the best of him and he started taunting the police again.
And then you have someone like Dorothea Puente. See, she wasn't just seen as normal. People thought she was a pillar of her community in Sacramento. Social workers actively praised her. They would actually send vulnerable, elderly, and disabled tenants to her boarding house because she seemed so incredibly caring. She built this fortress of trust around herself, which she then used as her primary weapon. Now, not all these monsters hide in plain sight for decades. Sometimes that hidden darkness just erupts in these chaotic, terrifying sprees that hold entire cities completely captive. These are the stories of explosive public terror. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, was basically the living embodiment of random terror. For 16 long months, literally no one in California felt safe. He'd break into homes with no rhyme or reason, no pattern, attacking men, women, and children. And the crucial part here wasn't just the awful physical violence. It was the psychological warfare. He would leave satanic symbols behind, creating this primal fear that he could strike anywhere, at any time, to anyone. And then there's a case like Robert Fisher's, which really shows you just how fast that mask of a normal family man can completely disintegrate. This guy was a firefighter, a Navy vet. But one night, after what neighbors said was a loud argument, his entire house just exploded. Inside, authorities found his wife and 2 kids had been murdered. Fisher himself, he just vanished, and he's still one of the FBI's most wanted, leaving behind nothing but the horrifying evidence of what he'd been hiding. Perhaps one of the most deeply disturbing cases involves Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka. They were called the Ken and Barbie killers, and on the surface, that's what they looked like, an attractive, happy young couple. But in reality, they were a horrific team who actually videotaped their crimes, which included the abuse and murder of Carla's own teenage sister. And this is where the story turned into a complete national scandal up in Canada. Homolka masterfully played the victim. She claimed she was an abused wife, that she was forced to do everything, and it worked. She got a shockingly light 12-year sentence in exchange for testifying against her husband. It was only after this deal with the devil was signed and sealed that the police found those hidden videotapes, proving she wasn't just a participant, she was an eager one. But by then, it was too late. The deal couldn't be undone. So how did these carefully built worlds come crashing down? Well, this is that moment. This is the unmasking. It's when the horrible truth is finally dragged out into the light. And it often happens in the most shocking ways you can possibly imagine. 29. Just let that number sink in. The remains of 29 young men and boys were found crammed into the crawl space right under the house where John Wayne Gacy lived his normal, everyday life. The entire time, his darkest secrets were literally buried just a few feet beneath his own feet.
7. For Dorothea Puente, the secrets weren't in a creepy crawl space, they were in her garden. Police literally unearthed the remains of 7 of her tenants from the very soil where she grew her roses. And all the while, this caring landlady was busy cashing their Social Security checks.
Now, the mask of normality isn't the only one that sociopaths wear. Take Joe Exotic, the Tiger King. Okay, he wasn't a serial killer, but his story shows a lot of the same traits, that total lack of empathy, the manipulation, all of it driven by a massive ego and greed. His public persona wasn't quiet and normal, it was outrageously flamboyant. And his unmasking didn't come from some gruesome discovery in his backyard, but from an FBI sting operation after he tried to hire a hitman to kill his rival.
And this chart really puts the final consequences into perspective, doesn't it? You can see right here how the prison sentences reflect the nature of their crimes. So Joe Exotic got 21 years for that murder for hire plot, while the serial murderers like Dennis Rader and Dorothea Puente, they received sentences that made sure they would never, ever be free again.
So when that mask is finally ripped off for good, what's left underneath? This quote from Richard Ramirez is just bone-chilling. After he was sentenced to death, he showed absolutely zero remorse. For him, death wasn't a punishment. He said it just went with the territory. It just reveals this profound, terrifying emptiness inside. And John Wayne Gacy was just as defiant right to the very end. No apology, no explanation for the 33 lives he completely destroyed. Just contempt. His reported last words, "Kiss my ass," they perfectly capture the unrepentant evil that was hiding behind the smiling face of Pogo the Clown. And so, we end up right back where we started. These stories, they prove that the most terrifying monsters, they aren't some mythical beasts from a storybook. They're human beings. Human beings who have mastered the art of blending in. And it really forces us to wonder, what masks are the people around us wearing? And what really lies behind them?